Welcome, everyone, and hello. Welcome to the International African American Museum Center for Family History monthly podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Shelley Viola Murphy, and I am thrilled to have everyone join us today for what promises to be an engaging and insightful discussion. I'd like to give a special welcome to our museum members. The podcast is live streaming right now through StreamYard and YouTube, and also in the museum in Charleston, South Carolina. We're proud to bring you this monthly podcast series held on the third Saturday of each month. This is where we explore topics that bring African American history, genealogy, and culture to life. These conversations are part of our ongoing commitment to connecting communities and their rich and diverse heritages. I'm joined by Whitney Day, Senior Research Assistant at the Center of Family History and at the museum in Charleston. As we move through today's discussion, we do encourage our attendees to participate actively. If you have any questions for the guests, please look to the right of your screen. There is a chat box there. And don't forget to put a Q in front of your question so we'll be able to spot it as a question. We'll open the floor for Q&A after the end of our discussion, so stay tuned for that. This session is being recorded. So now let's welcome our distinguished guests. Please take a moment for each of you to introduce yourself, share your titles, and tell us a bit about your roles with Black Appalachia Group. And I'll start with William Ison.
Hey, thanks for having me. And Tina as well. I'm William Isom. I'm from Eastern Tennessee. We're based here in Whitesburg, Tennessee, which is in Hamblen County. I'm the director and co-founder of Black in Appalachia. Started this 13 years ago. Born and raised here in East Tennessee for many, many generations.
Great. Tina McDaniel?
Yes, my name is Tina McDaniel, and I currently live in Bristol, Tennessee. I am from East Tennessee. I was born in Johnson City, Tennessee, and lived a lot of my life in Limestone, Tennessee, which is very near Greenville. I know we were having, before we went live, we were having discussion about Greenville. I began work with Black in Appalachia probably around 2019, or maybe a little bit earlier, when I retired from my corporate career. So I consider myself, in terms of a title, I'm a community advocate for bringing visibility to African American history in my community.
Thank you for that. So my first question is actually to define what Appalachia is. Is it certain states that are included, or certain areas within some southern states, and so forth? So I pose this question for folks because our audience could be new to this whole topic that we're going to discuss today and not know that they might have connections in these certain areas. So I'll let whoever wants to take that question to go for it.
Yeah, so Appalachia as a kind of political and cultural formation was kind of formally established by the federal government during the War on Poverty around 1969. And so the Appalachian Regional Commission considers 13 states and 420 counties Appalachia. And that definition is based on geography, but also poverty rates. And so it runs from upstate New York down to northern Mississippi, the cities of Birmingham, the cities of Pittsburgh, and everything in between. It's a very diverse region. We work primarily in central Appalachia, which is western North Carolina, East Tennessee, Southwest Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, West Virginia, and a little bit in southeastern Ohio. And even within that footprint, it's a very diverse area. People equate Appalachia with coal mining. And it's true, we have coal fields in Southwest Virginia and Eastern Kentucky and West Virginia, but we also have, where we're at is the industrialized River Valley. Lots of agriculture, tobacco, corn, hogs, cattle. But then Western North Carolina and Southern West Virginia also have robust tourism economies. So it's a very diverse region, but we're kind of tied together by our poverty rates and our
Yes.
topography.
So what inspired the mission and the vision for the Black Appalachia? How did that kind of get started? And what's the impact to that coming out? Because I know there's projects which we'll mention in a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the Black in Appalachia began formally as a project of East Tennessee PBS, the public television station in Knoxville, Tennessee. But prior to that, I had been doing research since I was a teenager of my own family, trying to research my own family into and out of chattel enslavement. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I realized early on is that our and my family's narratives, the Isom family narratives, were not in the local historical societies. They were not in the local repositories, and they weren't necessarily considered valuable by these entities that claimed to hold our collective histories. And so working at East Tennessee PBS, I had the opportunity to a cousin of mine wanted us to produce a short documentary about Swift Memorial Institute, which is a late HBCU nearby here in Rogersville, Tennessee. And so we produced that documentary, and the response that we got was kind of overwhelming. And it let us know that it let me know that this is something that people need. It wasn't just me understanding and seeing this need across the region. It was bigger than me and my family. And because I personally had learned to do my research before the internet, and it's a little bit different approach to research Black families' history. I got really good at it. And so I knew that this skill set, the media production, along with the research skills, was a service that I could help provide to my neighbors as well. And so it kind of came out of that need that was identified by me personally, but then also as expressed by the community at large.
So you made a couple points that are sticking out to me about the entities that typically people go to that didn't have your history in there. And so that tells me, as a researcher, there's oral history that is probably still not available that are within people's families. So it's not written down, but generations might be still acquiring information. So if I talk about some of the unhidden histories or things, and Tina, and you can respond as well, can you share with us some of the most surprising or impactful stories that you guys either have from your own families or that you are aware that your projects have uncovered?
Absolutely. I'd love to tackle that question. So much like William, I retired in 2016, 2017, and I was really interested in learning about the African American history of the community where I live. And it's Bristol, Tennessee, Bristol, Virginia. We're a dual state. One of the that I learned I probably learned this in 2017, that there was a gentleman who was born here in Bristol, Virginia. His name is Dr. Charles Spurgeon Johnson, the first African American president of this university. He was a noted sociologist. He was a pioneer whenever you look at the Harlem Renaissance. He was a part of the Urban League, and his father was the pastor of my husband's home church here in Bristol. So learning about Dr. Charles Spurgeon Johnson was really eye-opening, and it led to researching a little bit more about the history of Bristol, particularly whenever we're looking at people who are involved in academia. So then I learned that Bristol has this wonderful HBCU connection. So we learned about Dr. Charles Spurgeon Johnson, who, by the way, his grandson is Jay Johnson, who is the director of the Department of Homeland Security under President Obama. So learned about him. Then we learned about a Dr. Vivian Henderson, who was also a president of an HBCU, Clark University in Atlanta, and then learned about another gentleman who was a barber who became a Rosenwald agent for the state of Tennessee. And the educational wing at Tennessee State University is named after him, and his name is Mr. R.E. Clay. So to me, that was just fascinating information, and it was a story that was hidden.
Very much so hidden. I had no idea I knew about Dr. Johnson and stuff, but just never equated all of these other things of these connections. So thank you for that. And William, do you want to add any stories?
Oh yeah, there's no shortage of stories. I can relate a personal story really quickly that in doing this research, trying to track my ISOM ancestors into and out of enslavement, while researching a slave cemetery in Gate City, Virginia, or no, Lee County, Virginia, just
that's the last county going out.
That's the far corner, the extreme Southwest Virginia,
yes.
as Ron Carson says it. And I was researching something else, but in doing that, found in a will my great-great-grandfather listed as property when the slaveholder passed away. And so for me, that was life-changing, because I had been searching for him for over 20 years. And knew he was from Virginia, but Virginia's a big state. And so found him listed with his siblings and his mother. His value was $1,200. But then also learned that he was, the estate farmed these enslaved people out to other people and made income from their labor. And so that was recorded in the county records. And the last note of his being farmed out and the money that he was generating noted that whether or not these slaves were worked after the fall of Richmond is not for me to say, which the fall of Richmond was the end of the Confederacy. And so they were worked perhaps past the Emancipation Proclamation up until the fall of Richmond. So for me, that inextricably ties my family's liberation to the fall of the Confederacy.
Sure.
That was a story that, in doing this research, doing the work, led me to a personal revelation, which was really impactful.
Very much so. So how does Black in Appalachia work with local communities to preserve and share the African American narrative, just like you guys just gave a couple examples? And what role do these communities play in the research? So I'm hoping there's things that people that are listening or watching to this will be able to go local with their research, which is very critical. So whoever wants to take that, Tina, go ahead. You're off mic.
Sure, I would love to take that. So Black in Appalachia has been involved in various community coalitions on projects. And I think that is a great way to partner with folks within the community. I know with the Charles Spurgeon Johnson and the Lee Street Baptist, what we did is we formed a team so that we could dedicate historical markers for Charles Spurgeon Johnson and Lee Street Baptist Church. So Black in Appalachia was very involved as a member of the coalition. So I think those partnerships are really important. And I think one of the most valuable things that Black in Appalachia has done for me in the projects that I've been involved with is really documenting, whether it's video, whether it's through their website. So that way the information lives on, and it also serves as a way to educate and even as a resource for researchers. So I think that is, there are multiple ways that Black in Appalachia is involved, but I think that documenting those events is really important so that we have a record going forward.
Which is great examples that you've given, and hopefully the audience will tap into some of those, because if they're not doing them, those are some examples of that interconnection and partnerships within a community and so forth. William, did you want to add anything? If not, I'll go on to my next question.
Just really quickly, there's kind of this analogy that we like to use, I like to use a lot, that was given to me by a mentor of mine. And it kind of is the framework for how and why we do this work. It's we call it the two mountains analogy. And so on one mountain, you have this official narrative. It's like the stuff, the courthouse records. It's kind of the stuff that genealogists swear by. If it's not in the courthouse records, it's not true. And then this other mountain is the vernacular or the oral histories. It's the stories that we tell each other. It's the stories that are passed down from our family members to each other. And so one of the things that we try to do is bridge those two entities, the official narrative and the vernacular oral histories, to try, by holding these two things up as equally valuable, not one above the other, we may be able to get to something that's close to near to something that may be considered around the neighborhood of truth, right? And so and these two things, the oral histories and the official narratives, can contradict or validate each other. And so it's really important that we have to consider both things in order to get a more robust understanding and a diverse understanding of our history, not just in Appalachia, but all across, the diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add something? Can I add something real quick? I failed to mention. One of the things that was extremely powerful for me was when I retired and I wanted to learn about the history of my community. Of course, I went to the Historical Association. There was not anything available. I learned about this Community History Day that Black in Appalachia sponsored. So I attended a Community History Day, and it's an invitation for folks within the community to bring their stories, bring their newspaper clippings, bring their photographs. Those records are scanned, and then there's an opportunity for oral story collection. So really, for me, because there was not anything in existence in terms of the history of the African American community in Bristol, this was the very beginning of the digital archive that was started around Bristol.
Which is interesting because there is a question that is put in the chat. So it sounds like you kind of just answered it. So I'm just going to bring it up right now. Is that Regina Calloway out in California says, Mr. Isom and Miss McDaniel, what were your first conversations in partnering for Black in Appalachia? And I think you just recognized, talking about the community day as a beginning. So is there any other comments to further respond to her question? And thank you, Sister Regina.
Yeah. That's our first conversation was Tina reaching out to me, because we don't go and start working in community without an invitation. And so Tina had attended some community history days in some communities that we had done, but then she approached us, and she's being a little coy because she actually organized and bottom lined the Bristol Community History Day, which had a vast, overwhelming response and participation from the community. So we rely on people working on the ground and community members to invite us in and then facilitate that work. And so that was the first conversation that we had together.
When I think about that, William, it was so meaningful because we had the Community History Day at one of the segregated schools. So it allowed those within the community who attended that school to come back, share their history, but then also just to kind of walk around the school and talk about memories of being in that school. So it was really an excellent event and really kind of launched us into other work.
It's a great example that you all are sharing, because those of us that research African American genealogy, regardless of where it's at, we are going to have challenges. And at this point, those of us that have been doing this for several years know you're going to expect them. And so what strategies and things can you combat them? And so we start planning our research based on what we know we're going to be faced with: lack of records, misspelling, incorrect, not being online per se for a convenience if I don't live in the locality where I'm going to do the research. But also, it's that community partnership. So I think that's really a great message to drive, because without each other and building, and just like you said, walking around, you gave people a chance to talk about their experience. And I think for those sitting on the outside, we want to hear that, and also say, oh, well, did my family also have similar experiences? So thank you for that, because that really is stressing, and we teach at Maggie, which is a genealogy institute focused just on African ancestry, is about community research. Exhaust the community. Don't worry about what's online, because they had to come to that community to get that information and put up online, which is a fabulous convenience for us that are not in these different areas. So now I'm going to go to the question about cultural contributions. And that was one of the questions. Are there some examples of how African Americans have influenced Appalachian culture in ways that might not be known or recognized?
Yeah, so certainly. I think that if you study Black history and you study Black culture, we should know by now that the banjo is an African instrument, and the banjo came from Africa and was transmitted from Black musicians to often poor working class white musicians in the mountains, and that they took it on to somewhere else. But one of the things, kind of the ripples out of Appalachia that has impacted, not just American culture, but Black culture across the country. Carter G. Woodson was an Appalachian. And so Carter G. Woodson created what would be known as Black History Week, and we know now as Black History Month. He was a West Virginian. But this guy here is not real well known. He's the guy on the right holding the mandolin. That's Leslie Riddle. And so Leslie Riddle was instrumental in the creation of what would eventually be known as country music as we know it today. He was known as enlisted as a song catcher with A.P. Carter of the Carter family, who was one of the founding families of country music. A.P. Carter came to Leslie Riddle doing an introduction because he was told that Leslie Riddle knew these Black musicians in the Mountain South. And so A.P. Carter and Leslie Riddle traveled around the region gathering songs. Leslie was known as the human tape recorder. He could remember the melodies of these songs, and whenever they would get back home, A.P. Carter would write down the lyrics, and Leslie Riddle would play the tunes and remember the tunes for these songs. And those tunes, you know how bureaucracy works. If you don't know how to deal with a record company, A.P. Carter and the Carter family has this vast, robust catalog of country music from the early days. You don't hear much about Leslie Riddle. He played music. He was from Burnsville, North Carolina, and came over to Kingsport, Tennessee, and worked largely in factories, played music on the side, and eventually went to Rochester, New York, to work in a factory, found the Lord, left that dirty music behind, but then later in his life, he got with Pete Seeger and some others and re-recorded some of his songs, and that's mainly why we know him today. But he's one of the foundations of country music as we know it today.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So I mentioned about challenges and things like that, but also challenges also linked to representation. And so again, our families, our individual families, we face these challenges, just like I mentioned earlier. So as far as the organization and also in your personal research, what have you faced in amplifying African American stories in the Appalachian region, that you've not been able to overcome? Are there stories or relationships or connections that you're still trying to achieve, per se?
I'm going to mention something, and I'm going to hand it over to Tina.
Okay.
One of the things that we currently face is access to the Black school records. We've been digitizing Black school records county by county, because it's a very important, vital resource for genealogy, but also understanding the economies in which Black families operated. The school records often cut across the decades of the census, so you can get a more robust view of Black life in those individual areas. But gaining access to those school records sometimes can prove to be difficult. And I think that can be related to other records that are sitting somewhere that people who work there don't even know that they're there, right?
Yeah. Or choose not to go into that box because of what might be in there. It's another way of looking at it as well. And that's a common challenge, I believe, with African American research. Tina, did you want to add? He was switching that over to you.
Sure. So a project that I am currently working on is related to a Black business district that existed here in Bristol. Urban renewal came through, everything was removed, and there's currently not any type of marking or anything that would even indicate that this business district existed. So getting a community to talk about what existed that is no longer there, and why it's no longer there, and why it was important is something that I'm really focusing on now. And what I'm doing is finding funders who really want to fund the work. So I guess it was back in May, there was a group that was in town, a funders network. So I did a tour and I talked about the Black Bottom Business District. And there were several people who were a part of that tour and they were very interested. So I've gotten an invitation from one of the funders to present a proposal on how I could acknowledge and bring awareness to Black Bottom. So, I mean, that's kind of one of those stories that your community doesn't really want to talk about. You know, why those businesses no longer exist and why there are no longer Black businesses, you know, in our downtown area. So I would say that is probably an area where I think representation is certainly a concern.
Yeah, and I would make some suggestions.
We're working through those challenges.
That's going to be a step-by-step thing there. So, but wow, you know, when that kind of comes out, look at the legacy and the things that you guys will probably uncover on that. So the educational impact, and we heard about Mr. Johnson. How does Black in Appalachia maybe use exhibits or public engagement to educate people in this region? Does Black in Appalachia put on those type of events and things like that? Can you share some of those community things that y'all do there?
I can speak to, I just recently led a project and it was a partnership with the Equal Justice Initiative out of Montgomery, Alabama. So the trip to Montgomery in 2018, I learned about a lynching that occurred in our town. So as a result, formed a coalition of folks within the community, had folks within government, so city officials, we had the faith community, we had nonprofits. So quite a few people, I think there were like a dozen, and of course, Black in Appalachia was part of that coalition. I had a co-chair who had done some work with lynchings in Wise County, Virginia. So what we did is for a year, we did education and awareness. A part of bringing that memorial to our city was making sure that we educated the community around lynching in America, and specifically the lynching of Mr. Robert Clark. So that is one way that I think we bring education and awareness is through the formation of a coalition and kind of working through that process and then going forward and educating the community on the project.
Which again, excellent examples. William, you came off your mic.
Yeah, and I want to say one of the things that we did was produce a short documentary about the facts as we knew it about the lynching of Robert Clark, so that the coalition could then utilize that film to educate people in the community about the facts as we know it in regards to that extrajudicial murder.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, William, because I think the beauty of the whole project was that documentary is what really launched our project. So the work that Black in Appalachia did around that particular documentary and other resources, as we kind of moved through the project, Black in Appalachia was there to document the soil collection. They were also there to document the actual dedication of the marker. So those resources serve as a way to educate. And then also Black in Appalachia developed a lesson plan. So there's a lesson plan that's out there as well.
So a question from one of the attendees, Ms. Stewart, says, does your work incorporate a study of the Melungeon people?
I'll tell you what, the Melungeon conversation is a very popular one. We don't, because, I grew up here in East Tennessee, which is kind of the core home of the Melungeon families. Grew up with Melungeon folks, but there's no need for that, right? The Melungeon story and the genealogy equated with Melungeon families is well researched. And so we kind of try to focus our labor around areas that need fleshing out, or are in danger of being lost. The story of the Melungeons is well documented, thank goodness. And I think that unless something new happens, I can't imagine that there's a need for more Melungeon scholarship.
Well, and it's interesting that this question comes up. I attended a meeting the other day with the Daughters of the American Revolution, and there's a specialty committee, and it's on Melungeons. And so you got to think back to the Revolutionary War. And so I'm anxious to see what comes out of that, because I was not familiar with that part of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and I have Melungeon ancestors as well. And mine are the Goins, which is a very, very common name throughout Virginia and Tennessee and so forth. So thank you, Stacy, for that question. And again, I understand the focus, because they are well researched and they continue to get well researched as well. So great question. And so you mentioned a little more. Rosalind Miller had a question about Carter Woodson's mother was a Riddle, and one of you mentioned the surname Riddle. Was Leslie Riddle related to Carter Woodson? If you know, or direct us to where further information could be found.
Yeah, so Carter G. Woodson's mother was not related to Leslie Riddle. It's a different set of Riddles in Southwest Virginia, in the border of Virginia and West Virginia. But there is something that's interesting about and this might be something fun for genealogists to look at, that we were kind of picking around, that Carter G. Woodson's, I guess, grandfather may have been enslaved. He was a Woodson, may have been enslaved on property adjoining the Woodson plantation, but there may be a connection between the Woodson that was Stonewall Jackson's stepfather and Carter G. Woodson's enslaved family. So get to work on that. I'm not going to do it, but
and report back.
Yeah, if anybody wants to follow that line. But the Riddles in that section of Virginia, Leslie Riddle's folks were from Western North Carolina, so I'm almost certain it was a different set of Riddles.
Okay, but thank you for that. So I want to just go forth a little on the digital and archival resources that are available. Do you all use those, that technology, the archives or oral histories, to document any of the narratives like you might have talked about today?
Yeah, we rely on digital platforms a lot. One of the things that we do, we are not a physical archive. We're not set up to house and hold and take care of physical materials, though we have a clip file here. When sometimes community members give us stuff, even though we don't want it, we have to take it. So we rely on digital archiving, and our over the years, that was one of the needs that we identified when doing the documentaries. We identified that there are community members who have these things in their basements, these Tupperware or Rubbermaid containers full of everybody's business in the community. And we wanted to figure out a mechanism for doing that thing where we hold that up as equally valuable as the official record. So we developed this Omeka site, blackinappalachia.omeka.net, as our community history database. And so it's kind of the repository, the digital repository for our the things that we've scanned in from community members, but also census data per county. We know that it's really important to try to breach that wall from national emancipation to chattel enslavement. And so we did county by county, created a Black and free persons of color census for 1860 and 1870 to try to, we're making something that I wish existed when I was doing this work early on. But we also, we had a podcast for about 6 or 7 years, the Black and Appalachia podcast. That's all digital. We rely on social media to not as, the social media that we utilize is not the work, but we use the social media to highlight things that we have found and work that we're doing. So out of our work comes the social media highlights of, look at this story that we found. We found this information. This is new on the community history database. And right now we're lucky enough to have a community archivist, formerly trained community archivist, Alana Norwood, and she's the one that bottom lines that work and manages the community history archive that you see there on that link. So we rely on digital things.
So you have a Facebook page and you have the website, which we're seeing. Are you on Instagram or any of the other social network platforms?
Yeah, we have a YouTube channel as well, where a lot of our videos and interviews and oral histories exist on the YouTube. We also have Instagram, and which is kind of like my generation, but then we have a TikTok, which I try to not be on at all, but we have that. And so we do have all the social media channels that we try to utilize to help highlight and make more visible Black narratives from our region.
So that's a great takeaway for folks that are tapping in and not knowing you're there. You're out there. So I definitely can see that. So how does the Black Appalachia address the intersection of race, class, and culture within the broader Appalachian experience?
Yeah, I like this question because one of the things that we really focus on is kind of the framing of a lot of our work is the holding up of and celebrating the narratives of working class Black folks in the region. And highlighting the greats is good. We need to do that, but also those greats weren't produced in a vacuum. Those greats were produced by teachers and ministers and church ladies, and their success was supported by people laboring, coal miners, railroad workers, again, teachers, and also the wives of those railroad workers and the wives of those coal miners and the farmers. And so these working class families are actually the ones that made the Black community work day to day. They're the ones that maintained the church and the school and the cemetery and the fraternal organizations and participated. And so I think for us, the intersection of class and race in the region is very important because it gives us an opportunity to talk about the power and the impact of everyday working families to the development of the region and to the importance of Black history as we know it here. One thing I just want to tap in on a little bit is me and Tina were talking about and doing the oral histories in Bristol. These teachers opened up the world for often rural young people. They provided a window to the broader world, and by encouraging these little country kids to leave this one-room schoolhouses and go into a HBCU in the region, right? We used to have 4 HBCUs within a 150-mile stretch here in Appalachia: Bluefield State, to Knoxville College, to Morristown College, to Swift Memorial Institute. And these teachers were instrumental in making sure that those young people were able to leave the farm and go into higher education if they wanted to. Similarly, we heard stories about the porters, the railroad porters in Bristol. Their family members would get tickets, railroad tickets, to go travel to these cities that they never would have gotten the opportunity to go to. And you had somebody looking out for you on the train. You had your uncle who gave you a ticket, and you could go to Roanoke, or you could go to Richmond for a couple of days and visit relatives and see like the broad scope of the world outside of your community. And that also helped create community connections, the connections of churches and schools, school sports teams. These connections spanned across geographical boundaries. So Western North Carolina, Eastern Tennessee, Southwest Virginia, and Eastern Kentucky are all within an hour of each other. And so these Black communities across the states built these networks. And I think that I'm going off script, but I think that these networks also provide a more robust understanding of Black narratives in the region.
And it also ties back into where you were talking about bringing, on the image that was up there of the oral history in this, and getting closer to the truth of what actually happened. So you talk about some of the digital things that are there. And so is there any books that are being produced by individual families, or things that you two are aware of about experiences, or just like you're talking about the oral history interviews, but is there any relevant books that are out there right now that we could, advise folks to go check it out to learn even more about Black Appalachia and stuff?
Yeah, there are publications. One of the things, as Tina said before, these narratives don't exist, and so we're having to build them.
Okay.
They don't exist, and the scholarship is lacking. But the organization Black in Appalachia was named after work that came before us. So we're standing, and this organization is kind of standing on the shoulders of the author, the co-editor of Blacks in Appalachia, a book that was written in the 80s, or put together by Edward Cabell and Dr. William H. Turner. And that's kind of the original publication on Blacks in Appalachia. And there's a new version of that coming out next year. A new, oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, so
that's a new book for me to order.
Okay. But there's other books in the region, and more. See, we have a bookstore back there.
Okay. Is it on your website?
Yeah, it is on our website.
Okay,
and we're currently uploading every book that we have in there to eBay, because we figured out that was the easiest way for people to be able to purchase those books, new and used books. But one of the things that's happening more and more now is we have access to publishing our own stuff, not just Black in Appalachia, but individuals. And so one of the things that is super valuable in our work are these homemade books that people produce that may not be from a university press, but they're books that people were able to put together and then sell on Amazon about very locally specific histories. And if you want, and if your attendees want, I can put a list together and then share that out with y'all.
Yes, I would.
Yeah.
I think that would be great. And Whitney has also posted 2 links to the book that Tina just shared as well. And yes, you also make another good point of folks having to, as we do this research, because I'm sitting here, we talked about Greene County, and I'm sitting here, I haven't written about that. I have a whole legacy in Greene County, Tennessee, great-grandmother, great-great-grandfather. And I thought, I have not told anybody about that story or what happened and so forth. And so thanks for that tip, because now I'm adding that to my list. And definitely people don't have to go to big publishers. Just like you said, you can look at individual groups like yours or self-publishing, whatever they want to do it. And there's a lot of resources about that are out there. So I want to go a little different here, because I think there are folks that are listening, and again, that aren't aware about Blacks in Appalachia. Number one, there were even Blacks in the mountain areas and so forth. And yes, it can go back prior to slavery times and things. Is there something specific that we would need to know that would be the one thing that says you need to check this group out? You got your mission, you got your vision. Tina talked about Bristol, Tennessee, which I'm going to assume is after Bristol, England, and the shipbuilders out there. And that's a whole nother conversation, Tina, that we could have, because I am doing research on them in England and so forth. So another conversation. But is there something that we could direct people to, that you think is a primary source besides coming to your website and looking at what you have?
Yeah. So one of the things that I like to say is, like, we do genealogical work on specific projects, but oftentimes we just produce the tools that genealogists can use. We don't necessarily do historic preservation of buildings, but we help provide support for those entities preserving the churches and the schools and whatnot. Nor do we necessarily do movement work or political movement work, but we help provide some of the tools that people can then utilize for movement work. Here locally, there's an organization. It's a chapter of the I got to get it right, because it's a chapter of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society.
We call that OGS.
OGS
for the abbreviation.
Yes. OGS, and I'm a member of OGS here in East Tennessee. And there's an East Tennessee chapter here, and it's really the only OGS chapter in the Appalachian region. So if you look, there's not really another OGS chapter in the immediate region of the Mountain South. And so that's a resource we go to. Personally, and more recently, talking about resources online and for research, I have thoroughly been engrossed in utilizing the Southern Claims Commission records, because Black people at that time, to my surprise, were allowed to give testimony and file Southern Claims Commission claims for property that may have been taken or utilized by the Union Army during the U.S. Civil War. Those have proven to be a great resource for doing research, and you can search by county and name for those Southern Claims Commission records, and you find out information. It takes you back into enslavement oftentimes, because some of those narratives, they're talking about, I was a slave of this person and I did this work and the Union Army took this from us. And so that's a resource that I've been really geeking out about over the past year or so. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
you're answering it. And Southern Claims Commission, and when you mentioned about witnesses, what you could be talking about is someone that was enslaved that is giving witness. So don't think it's all free people. And I'm saying this to the audience, because enslaved people had a voice on coming in and either supporting whatever claim was being filed or this, that, and other. They're a witness of that. So fascinating record collection. And I will say, Louisville, one of the libraries has a collection of Southern Claims Commission, but also you can get them right off of Fold 3 as well, and other, entities to do it. So a quick Google search on Southern Claims Commission, Tennessee, or whatever it is there. Bernice Bennett, who's a genealogy buddy of mine, does an excellent presentation. I believe it is out on YouTube somewhere on the Southern Claims Commission, another record collection. And I mentioned the Freedmen's Bureau before we got online, another deep collection that folks can start looking at that now is at our convenience of being online as well. So Tina, for you, are there some takeaways that you would say to go check? Could it be archives? Is there local historical societies, like maybe in Bristol, Tennessee, or other places that you all have tapped into?
Yeah, sadly, there are no particular resources locally with the historical. So I have heavily relied on Black in Appalachia and resources that are recommended by Black in Appalachia. I've been very involved in, of course, oral story collections. We had a group of students from Virginia Tech that came here to Bristol and interviewed some of the older members of our community. So oral story collection is kind of where my heart is, listening and hearing the stories of older people within the community.
So I have a question since you talked about that, because Whitney, who you met is in our background here, she heads up for the Center for Family History, what they call Centurion interviews. And people apply, and then she interviews them via Zoom or whatever the situation is. And it's grasping these stories of people in their 90s and over 100 and gathering, which is now looked at as a collection. And people can see those interviews or listen to them on the museum's website. And I'm sure she's hearing me talk, so she'll put a link in the chat. So we have a question from Regina. What are some of the family community Blacks in Appalachia surnames, if you will, or regions that could guide us to look deeper into our family archives, records, and trees? Can you share some of the surnames that, even if it's your own family or that you're aware of? We've had Carter, we've had Woodson, and so forth.
Yeah, it's interesting because you can these family surnames kind of sit firmly within geography. And so, I know that if I'm working in Western North Carolina, there's going to be a lot of Youngs. There's going to be a lot of Manises. There's going to be Jacksons. And so Flacks. And so, Roberta Flack, her family. And so there's those surnames that you're going to see per region, and you're going to be like, oh, even if you don't know that those are Black folks, when you see those names within a particular geography, you can be like, oh, okay, I got a hint. Irwins and all iterations of Irwins, Irwin, Irving, Irvin, are in Western North Carolina. You have in East Tennessee, we have Treeses, Isoms, Jacksons again, Lord have mercy, Chestnuts, Simpsons, and then some of the kind of free people of color names, Coles, Cole, and you can find those in Western North Carolina, Eastern Tennessee, and Southwest Virginia, often equated with kind of Black indigenous families that kind of bounce around and morph depending on who's taking the census record. But also in Southwest Virginia, you had Justices, you had Mullinses, again, Isoms, Tartars, and yeah, on and on and on. Adams in Eastern Kentucky.
Yeah, and I think that's where my family.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking my family in Southwest Virginia, like Dickinsons, Wades, and Bundys are some popular names in Southwest Virginia.
Every name you all are listing, I know those as Virginia names. Everyone, even down to the Bundy. I'm researching a Black Revolutionary War soldier was a Bundy. And again, another conversation for us to see if these things interact. And it's interesting. And Margot
Yeah,
Williams,
Bundy is my family. Mhm.
okay, I will follow up with you. Definitely follow up. And so let me ask you a question on your website, because we're winding down here. On the website, is there a source there that people could look to see maybe surnames? And I know we talked about the books and things. What about the surnames, or is anything kind of regional? And I don't know if I'm asking the right question on that, but can we look at this as regional since we're talking about a wide area?
Yeah. So we, on our Omeka site, the Black in Appalachia
Okay.
.omeka.net, you can plug in surnames on that.
Okay.
And find out. But also on our YouTube channel, you could type in surnames on the YouTube to like get to the oral history that may or may not be mentioning your family. Region, like if we encompass the region, one of the things to consider in researching the Appalachian region is that there were several waves of Black folks that came in, right? And as long as white folks have been in the mountains, Black folks have been in the mountains,
Been there too,
free and enslaved. And so what you had was during the colonial period, you mentioned Black Revolutionary War soldiers. Some of them settled in the Appalachian region after the Revolutionary War with their land grant. They got it and they moved here. So the colonial period, you had probably, I think it's 20% of the people, you've heard Daniel Boone and the Wilderness Road. 20% of the people that traveled with Daniel across the Wilderness Road were free and enslaved Africans. And so that you're looking at 40 to 60,000 individuals that traveled through the Cumberland Gap into what was known as the frontier at the time. So that's a wave, right? You had the early wave, and then you had another wave that came in with the spread of enslavement and the trading of enslaved people up until national emancipation. Then you had this in and out migration and consolidation of communities in the mountains. And then after the Civil War, you had this other influx of Black folks from the Deep South that came to work in the coal mines. And so then desegregation, you had a general, and the terror of Red Summer and racial atrocities, you had out-migration at that point from the 1920s to the 1950s. And so lots of in and out of the region. I don't know if that answers your question, but I just wanted to point that out.
It does.
For
And I think
researchers.
I think the audience has got the gist of, where you went with that. No, excellent source. And again, Whitney has put some, your YouTube channel link is in the chat for the folks if they didn't see it. And also the comments about that was an awesome share, that you both have alluded to. And so I've got one last question. Kind of two. Number one is, Black in Appalachia, a nonprofit. And then the second part of the question is looking ahead. What are the key goals for Black in Appalachia? And how does the listeners and community support or get involved in helping you with your mission?
Yeah, going forward, I mean, we are a nonprofit. We are currently in the process of building a radio station here in our field office.
Awesome.
Tina's continuing to work on the Black Bottom project to continue to do tours. This photograph, actually, through Tina's labor, was something that she discovered in the urban tracking down photographs of Black Bottom, the urban renewal files that are held by the Bristol Housing Authority. So that's a line of research. If you're looking for urban renewal files, go to your local housing authority, and I guarantee they're in a box
federal, so it
that
goes
nobody's
up.
looked at. But we're building a radio station. We would encourage people to donate to us. If you're a funder, send us a RFP so that we can keep everything moving.
Yes.
But the main thing that we rely on is labor. One of the things that we as Black people have not had the luxury of is applying dedicated labor to our own narratives. We've applied labor to everybody else's interest in this country since we've been here, but we've not been able to dedicate labor to telling our own stories and fleshing out our own narratives. And so that's kind of our role. And that's what we do is we just work and apply labor to Black narratives in a way that we've not had the luxury to do.
Yeah.
But I will say, shoot us an email. We take you could work remotely if you want to volunteer, because there's no shortage of work that needs to be done here and across the region.
Appreciate that. Tina, you want to add to that at all?
No, I think William has covered everything. I'll be working on Black Bottom. It was a treasure to find those files. So looking forward to how that project will progress. We had already done some work around with Black in Appalachia around Black Bottom, and we didn't talk about it, William, but we used, is it called tell me what the
GIS.
GIS. Okay, we use GIS mapping to map some of the Black businesses in Black Bottom. So we've got a foundation of work, and I'm really excited about building on that.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to say you each get the chance to give the audience one takeaway from your discussion today. So William, I'll go back to you. What is the one takeaway you want to make sure people got about Black in Appalachia?
When we first started doing this work, I was doing an oral history with a woman in Newport, Tennessee. And I asked the same question. I was like, what do you want people to know about your community? The one thing, and she said that we're here. And so I think that our work is to make sure that others know that we're here, but also we want to make sure that those in and from this community know that their stories are valuable, their stories are validated, the narratives that they've been told by their family and the photographs that they have and materials are just as important as anyone else's, and so that our young people can see that this is their place as well.
Awesome. Tina?
Yes, I would echo some of what William said. My parents were elderly, and that's the reason why I became so involved in making sure that I collected stories. So I would encourage people to talk to your family members to get those stories documented. Black in Appalachia was the platform that I utilized. It was the resource that I didn't know existed. So I'm sure that if anybody has any questions, that we would certainly, be available to help out. But I say, talk to your family members, get those stories and capture those stories.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to close out here, and I really want to thank everyone, especially the guests here, William and Tina. And Tina had to relocate to a different location for folks if there was questions about what's behind her because of the internet and stuff. But we appreciate you being here today on behalf of the International African American Museum Center for Family History. So we just say thank you. I think the discussion was very valuable, and it gave us a new way to look at some things, but also how to get involved. And of course, people can always donate and support these type of projects. Your work is not only inspiring, but it's crucial to ensuring that these stories in your mission, and I'm going to say in this Appalachia region, are remembered and celebrated. To the viewers and listeners, thank you all. We are here. We're on StreamYard. We're on YouTube. We're also in the museum in Charleston. We appreciate your time and your engagement. And again, your participation is what makes this such a meaningful experience. So as we wrap up, the next podcast that comes is Saturday, August the 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And the discussion will be around how descendant groups are preserving African American history. So mark your calendars and join us for another Saturday. And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep connecting with your history. From all of us at the International African American Museum Center for Family History, take care and have a wonderful day. And just hold on a moment, guest, while she takes us out. And thank